Mass consumption. In 910, Duke William of Aquitaine donated his hunting lodge at Cluny for use as a new monastery. He was sick of church corruption and keen for people to recapture the spirit of Benedict's original rule of living. Not him, obviously, but other people, holy people, monks. What made his move different, in an era when bishops, archbishops and even popes were appointed by local rulers, was that he gave the monastery the independence to choose its own leader. He set up a charter, which, as well as protecting the monks' independence, ends with a magnificent array of colourful curses on anyone who should try to interfere with the abbey, including everlasting damnation, his members putrefying and swarming with vermin. Cluny gave hope, initially at least, to all those who still believed that the church was capable of more than politics, greed and murder. But William's grant made Cluny enormously wealthy, possibly the richest monastic house in the west. The church was adorned with solid and silver candelabras and chalices of gold. The monks ate roast meals and drank fine wines. Their vestments were made from the finest linen and silk. They subcontracted the running of the estates to employed servants and managers, and in effect became professional prayers. Monks, not just at Cluny, became a kind of spiritual service industry. Medieval society believed in prayer, but it didn't always have time for it. And even though the times were violent, there was still a strong sense that warfare and killing wasn't a particularly Christian thing to do. If you engaged in war, technically, you had to do penance in the form of prayer and fasting and the saying of the Mass. When, for example, William the Conqueror led his Norse troops across to conquer the plucky Anglo-Saxons, his leaders were actually given penances. It has been calculated that if they'd actually done these penances, they would have been too weak to have conquered the rest of England, and we would now be eating cow instead of beef. So, what you did was outsource your penance to the professionals, endow a monastery to do your religious stuff, pay a priest to say a mass on your behalf. It sounds terribly cynical, but we should remember that this society didn't have our individualistic view of life. God was like the Inland Revenue. He didn't mind whose account the money came from, as long as the tax was paid. Actually, they probably do mind, but so far they apparently haven't spotted that my checks come from the Bank of Toy Town. No. This dependence on third-party service provision gave the church a lot of leverage. People needed monks and priests and churches and all that stuff, otherwise they were headed straight to hell. So the abbots and monks gained a lot of prestige. Now, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Many women found that being an abbess gave them the chance to exercise gifts of leadership that would have been denied to them otherwise. And it also meant that there was an increased demand for the Eucharist, which by now was being called the Mass, from the Latin word missio, which is the dismissal at the end of the service. It means dismissal or sending, and it's the same root as the word mission and missionary. So where previously Eucharist had been a weekly sung service with lashings of ritual, now production had to be ramped up. So a simplified version was developed, a low Mass, that was said to as often as possible, with just a server in attendance to represent the congregation. Monks were now ordained priests in order to keep up with the demand, and side altars were added to the churches, so that you didn't have to use the rest of the church. It was the age of mass consumption. We end on a pun.